Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Emily Hiles, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Sergeant Lindsay Trott. This evening, we warmly welcome Brigadier General Linnell Latendra, Dean of the United States Air Force Academy, and her accompanying delegation. We also warmly welcome the international delegation visiting with the Defence Strategic Communications Branch, HMAS Harmon. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Club Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial and students on behalf of King's College from Warrnambool, Victoria, and Cubs from the Garran Scout Group from Garran here in the Australian Capital Territory. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the National Anthem.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are one and free. With golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is got by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains, then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where family and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Private Allan Ernest Rostron. Allan Rostron was born on the 2nd of April 1898 in the Blue Mountains town of Lawson in New South Wales. Affectionately known as Al, he was the only son of Alexander Rostron and his wife Louisa. Al received his education at Lawson Public School and later at Katoomba High School, where he was a keen student. He went on to train as a telegraph messenger, qualifying in 1912. At the outbreak of the First World War in 1914, he was employed as a messenger at the Lawson Post Office. Allan Rostron enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force on the 31st of August 1915. Although he gave his age as 18 years and 4 months, he had in fact only recently turned 17. He was accepted, however, and was allocated to reinforcements of the 1st Battalion, joining his 63-year-old grandfather Duncan, who had enlisted some weeks earlier. After a short period of training, the pair embarked together from Sydney on the 8th of October 1915 on board the troop ship Warrilda. Private Rostron joined his battalion in Egypt in February 1916, but was separated from his grandfather, who had been transferred to the newly formed 53rd Battalion. In March, Rostron embarked for the Western Front. He arrived in Marseille after a week at sea and then travelled to the Franco-Belgian border. He was attached for duty with the traffic police, perhaps on suspicion that he was underage. By the end of July, he rejoined the 1st Battalion. Shortly after, he was involved in his first major battle when his unit attacked enemy positions at the village of Pozières. It was a baptism of fire for the young man, taking part in bitter fighting that would cost more than 23,000 Australian casualties. Following the carnage at the Somme, Rostron and his comrades moved to a quieter sector in Belgium, where they continued their training. The unit then returned to France later in 1916, just in time to spend a bitterly cold winter in the front lines. Early 1917 was marked by the German strategic withdrawal to the fortified Hindenburg Line. Their retreat was eagerly followed by Allied units, which seized the opportunity to push the enemy back. In advancing on the Germans, these units were confronted by well-prepared rearguard defences and booby-trapped towns, which resulted in a series of bloody clashes. Rostron was caught in one of those battles when his unit attacked enemy positions near the village of Bullecourt. An earlier attempt to break through the Hindenburg Line had been a miserable failure, costing more than 3,000 Australian casualties with absolutely no ground taken. Rostron's unit was sent over the top on the 3rd of May 1917 as the Allies made their second attempt to break through the Hindenburg Line and capture the village. Under murderous enemy machine gun and artillery fire, the men pressed forward, managing to breach the wire entanglements and enter the enemy's front line. After a week of fighting, the enemy finally gave up the blood-soaked fields of Bullecourt. These were won at a cost of a further 7,000 casualties. Having survived the attack on Bullecourt, Rostron was granted 2 weeks' leave, which he spent in England. He returned to the front in June and shortly after was sent to the Ypres salient in Belgium. His unit fought in increasingly horrendous conditions at Menin Road in September, as well as Bruges-Cinder and Passchendaele in October. Throughout the campaign in Belgium, the Australians suffered almost 40,000 casualties. The remainder of 1917 was spent suffering through another cold winter in the trenches. In March 1918, the 1st Battalion was serving in the front lines when the enemy began firing gas shells on its position. Unable to fit his respirator quickly enough, Private Rostron suffered a lungful of gas, which forced his evacuation to England for treatment. He rejoined his unit on the 5th of July and within a matter of days was drawn into the fighting around Strasile, where a significant breakthrough by the enemy had been repulsed. On the 11th of July, Rostron was sent out with several other men to capture enemy posts in front of their line. They encountered resistance from the Germans. Rostron pushed forward, killing one and taking a further 3 enemy soldiers prisoner. Private Rostron was later awarded the military medal for this action, with his recommendation noting, "By his daring in overcoming this point of resistance, he greatly assisted the capture of the remaining posts and their garrisons." Rostron's unit then took part in the Great Allied Offensive on the 8th of August 1918 at Amiens. Making use of infantry, tanks, aircraft and artillery, the offensive was a stunning success. On the 18th of August, the 1st Battalion began its attack on the Hindenburg outpost line, attempting to breach the enemy's complex system of trenches when Rostron was hit by enemy sniper. His comrades rushed to his assistance, but little could be done for him as he bled out and died soon after. Rostron's family paid tribute to him with a poem placed in the Sydney Morning Herald. It read, "Could I, his mother, have clasped his hand, the son I knew so well, or kissed his brow when death was near, and whispered, my son, farewell? I seemed to see his dear sweet face through a mist of anxious tears, but a mother's part is an anxious heart and a burden of lonely tears." Private Allan Rostron was 20 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, amongst almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Allan Ernest Rostron, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall not grow old as we who are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of our director, staff and volunteers, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support of the Memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening.